Welcome, everybody, arriving in for this session on what does it really cost SMEs to start their journey to net zero. And we're really building upon the wonderful conversations that were had at our live event at the Lighthouse in Glasgow, where we had a range of wonderful panelists talking about the practical action steps that they were already taken. And Adam has joined us here in order to continue the conversation so that we can drill down into the more smaller businesses and what small businesses can do to help. But before we get started, we're going to just take a moment to settle in as everybody's kind of coming into the call. And we're going to hear from my granny again. Some of you will have already heard from her today. It's a simple reminder of what's important on our journey to net zero and bringing in some of that elder wisdom into the space.
There's always to see something in nature that astounds you. Always. On some occasions, my husband and myself, we got up 5 o'clock and went down to the seaside, and it was absolutely heaven. There was such a peaceful air about it, and all you could see now and again, a seal climbing onto one of these wee islands. So that was always quite good. Early in the morning, there's such a peacefulness in the air. You know, you don't get through the day. I don't know, we haven't seen any seagulls here. There was a time, every morning at a certain time, you heard one seagull, sea thing, quawking about, you know, early in the morning. At first, when I saw the really high mountains, I wondered what that was. And then it dawned on me, I said, oh my God, these are the mountains. I don't know, I was quite in awe of it, especially when the sun has been shining all day and there's a glow in the mountains. The whole mountain lights up. I was quite smitten with that when I saw it first. The same, the sea can light up. I remember there was a really, really hot day, and the sea had taken a glow. All the waves that came in, they were all lit up. That was quite a sight to see. Yeah. Well, I grew up with nature. We had quite a few fields. And as children, we had to walk there, you know. Sometimes, you know, once I said to my mother, much to my greatest regret afterwards, other children have holidays to play in. We have holidays to walk in. But when I look back, I always enjoyed it. Yeah, I always enjoyed it. And I can still remember crabbling about on the earth, and we had really good soil. You could get your arm right into it and felt the cool earth going over your arm, you know. So, as I say, I'm a peasant by nature, getting things to grow and walking the earth. Yeah, you know, it's very peaceful and very therapeutic. As I say, if you open your eyes, there's always something interesting to see in nature.
Right, Granny. I'll see you in a bit.
Yeah.
I think the Scottish Net Zero community was probably setting a record today at the Lighthouse event of having the first person speaking from beyond the grave, with a reminder of what's important. So with that said, Adam, we're moving into another really important topic here. I'm just going to give you the floor. What does it really cost SMEs to start their journey to net zero?
It's a big question to answer, I think. But we'll start by saying I think it's a lot cheaper than people expect, but also there are definitely financial barriers that are put in place. So if I could just expand on that very briefly, what I mean by that is in terms of starting your journey to net zero, I think it is extremely cheap and it is going to save you money in some regards, where things like changing your suppliers to be more net zero aligned, so with other kind of companies who are also on their journey to net zero, that is typically a free action you can start doing and isn't necessarily going to cost you more money. And also a lot of the net zero actions are around waste reduction and therefore cost reduction and therefore more profit. So there's an argument there to be said that net zero is actually going to make you more money. And is the word cost the right word to be using at all? Which we'll come on to later, I imagine. And then secondly, I think it is also going to be quite expensive when you get to the material world in terms of looking at your office space and going, well, this office space is not insulated at all. We're going to need to insulate it. We're going to need to put warehouse insulation in or whatever that might be, depending on your business, which then suddenly does land you with a bill of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds, which is not going to be very welcomed, I guess, by small businesses necessarily, because the payback periods for that are going to be so long and maybe you're renting from them. So this is where it gets very difficult and very fragmented, because I think for small businesses, someone running a warehouse, someone running a hairdressers, and someone running a digital marketing business from home, they are all small and micro businesses, but all of which have very different costs associated to this net zero journey. So there is no one single answer to it, but this is where the frustration comes from, I think, in terms of the cost, and maybe we need to move more towards investment as a reframing of this, because over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, businesses aren't going to be working with other businesses who are potentially exposing them to climate risk, which I think is a term we've not explored, or I've not really come across that much, but certainly in the past few days, I've thought of it a bit more as if you are working with supplying Tesco's flour so they can make bread and then sell it to people, they're going to be under legal pressures to understand where their climate risks are sitting. And if you're a business that is grinding that flour with a diesel generator or a coal-powered generator, if such a thing exists, at least exists now, obviously it didn't exist before, that is going to be something that they are not willing to work with you on, and therefore they're going to want to replace you. And therefore the cost there is that you're losing business. And so suddenly you're going from a position of losing money just to the risk to your business being exposed through climate action from a policy point of view.
And I like what you've said there, because it's really powerful. You highlighted that the way that small businesses can actually start saving money is by starting to look at their own supply chain and making those small and subtle shifts. But conversely, that's where the opportunity comes in for investment, because what you're saying is, we're all part of a supply chain in some way, shape and form. And there is pressure coming from bigger organizations looking at their supply chains on how to change it. And if you take the opportunity to jump on and shift it from going, this is not a cost, this is actually an investment, and this is a long-term investment in my business, this then means that I'm going to be the supplier that people are going to continue to want to work with because I'm taking a proactive stance.
Precisely. And I think at the minute, this is quite intangible, and it's very hard to find concrete examples of this in the world, because those legislative changes are only just coming in. I think it was a week or two ago that Rishi Sunak announced the SDR, the Sustainable Development kind of requirements or regulation, or a word beginning with R. But essentially it was that large companies are going to start having to legally look at their exposure to climate contributions. Now, that's a key phrase that goes further to there's another policy thing called the Task Force for Regulated Financial Disclosures or something like that. TCFD is a horrible, messy word, but essentially what it means is large organizations need to look at their balance sheets and go, okay, what elements of this are at risk over the next 50 years from climate change? The SDR is going one further beyond that and going, what are your contributions to that climate risk? And so suddenly that really does shift the way that businesses are having to operate and think at the larger levels, where they're going, as Tesco's, just to go that example again, if they are working with suppliers who are actively working against them and they are actively producing risk into the supply chain because they are not net zero compliant or they're not on that journey to net zero, that is going to fundamentally mean that Tesco's is failing from a legal point of view, but also just from a business point of view, it's increasing the risk to its own supply chain. So why would they want that? And therefore they're going to start having to dismantle their system and their supply chains and rebuilding them with other net zero suppliers. And there's a big position here of if you can position yourself as a supplier who is net zero aware and that you're on that journey, you're going to be able to make their problems go away, and you're going to be providing a reassurance to these large organizations that actually you are going to win business from them. So that's kind of the opportunity side of it. But obviously the actions, I guess, of getting there are going to cause costs to be incurred around in certain areas, but even then it is going to depend a lot on the business. So, electric vehicles, charge points, kind of solar panels, etc. These are all things that do cost money, but again, there's an argument there on a case-by-case basis over actually that's going to reduce your risk to things like gas shortages or fuel crises and things like that, where your costs are going to go up in the future as well. Because I don't think we're going to be returning to a point where petrol's below 130 a litre, really, at least not quickly, just because of geopolitics. And if you've got a fleet of EVs, you've immediately removed that risk from your supply chain. And again, therefore, Tesco's is going to see you as a more reliable supplier, because you know that as long as the wind's blowing, the sun's blowing, or there's nuclear power, that you can drive that electric vehicle. So it's a bit of a tangent there, but yeah.
Well, I think it's a tangent, but it's also relevant, because what I was listening to you say is it's really important, especially if you consider bigger businesses part of your customer base, that you need to be proactive to make sure that you don't get displaced. And you also mentioned hairdressers earlier on, which I think is a really important point, because, if you're maybe a small hairdressing salon, or, accountants or other maybe more service providers that don't directly deal with big businesses, for example, say you're actually working with, customer base rather than businesses, the question can be there of, well, do I really start that journey as well? But what I'm hearing you say is the actual same principles apply, whether you're supplying big businesses or whether you're supplying clients, because clients are going to go for the people who are showing their commitment to the environment, especially as the awareness continues to grow.
I think that's an industry that is far more established, and there's a lot more stats out there around that in terms of consumer demand wanting to take action on climate change. And 78%, I think it was a Futura report, was like 78% of people now want to work with eco brands and buy from eco brands. I think we're still at a bit of a transition point where that's what people answer in surveys, but might not translate into people actually taking that action out of convenience. But it's certainly a point of difference, both on the consumer side and on the business side. So I don't think there's any negative to you going out there and saying that you are a net zero hairdresser, or that you are a carbon positive hairdresser, or whatever it may be. I just don't see how those actions are ever going to be a negative for you over the next 5 to 10 years. Over the next 6 months, maybe they will be a bit difficult and a bit of a pain in the ass to deliver, and maybe you are going to have to spend a little bit of money. But I think it comes down to the word resilience, and it is really going to be about building resilience into your business over the next 5 to 10 years. And this is where you then get back to the idea of funding, I guess, and going, well, do the government need to support those businesses more? And the answer is yes. That there could be a lot more we're doing. And I think COVID has proved that the infrastructure is there, and that when the will is there to deliver a large scale of small amounts of finance to small businesses, it can be done in particularly record time. We're talking weeks, not years here. So there is that side of it, which I think is a frustration point, and there is definitely a communication and a almost a will gap, really, between government and small businesses in terms of what's needed. Because from a personal point of view, when I've been researching grants and loans and various bits for clients, typically, you're talking tens of thousands of pounds and upwards, which isn't often what small businesses actually need. It's not tens of thousands of pounds. It's normally a couple of grand just to get them to remove that hesitancy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, so there's a couple of things that I'm hearing you say there. One is, we have to accept that there might be a bit of short-term disturbance in order to create long-term business resilience. And fundamentally, I mean, that's a principle of how ecosystems and nature itself works. There's a bit of transformation that goes on where things decay ever so slightly in order for new growth to emerge. But it's the point that you're making there of being able to understand the costs. And I think this is why I'm assuming that you've set up your business to offer practical advice, but also how the Scottish Net Zero community can also support small businesses in the future. Because what you're saying is traditionally people are getting left out because they need small grants. But say, for example, Brian McAlpine, I think it's DHB Europe, is talking about group purchasing. And it's a really simple concept. It goes back to what you said about the supply chain. If you can get a group of businesses in a local area or a group of businesses all of the same network, say like hairdressers, for example, if 20,000 hairdressers all came together and said, we're going to go and buy our energy from one supplier, they then start getting the preferential treatment that comes from being a big business. Yeah. And that's part of the collaboration and the coming together of being able to almost circumvent the lack of financial resources that are in place by having, I suppose, to be a little bit creative, recognizing that the financing isn't there for small businesses, but looking at collaboration to go for bigger funding.
I think this goes back to the first point over. It's actually very cheap to get started, and that if you do have those 20,000 hairdressers and all of those look at their supply chain and go, do you know what, we're not going to buy from Tresemme this month because they keep using plastic and they're not doing anything to net zero. We're going to use greenhairproducts.co.uk instead because they do have net zero commitments and they're far better and blah, blah, blah. That shift in just the system, it's very hard to detect because it is so fragmented over 20,000 individual businesses making individual choices. But as a systems change, that will then go, well, that's something that everyone can do. It's probably not going to cost much money up front. That's going to be maybe there's a premium of £1 a bottle or something like that on the actual product. But it's not business ending levels of change there. And it is something that is very cheap and free for you to do in terms of being able to look at your supply chain and just make that decision. So I think that collaboration point is really key, and you are correct. And just that it's not about your business, it's about your business in the network of the businesses that you know. Because I think something that is more common with small businesses than large businesses is working with others. In that, if you go to the net zero community, or you go to your local chamber of commerce, or you go to an industry specific kind of networking group, there's probably people within all those networks that you know and you will happily talk to and collaborate with, and at a speed that which large organizations can't replicate.
Mm-hmm. And you're building very much on something that Martin Valenti said earlier on today in his recorded message, where he was saying that the whole point of the Scottish Net Zero community is for businesses to come together and collaborate, because no one business has its answer. And the more that businesses can speak and find out how one service can support another service, that's really how we're building resilience into small businesses.
Exactly. I think that collaboration is, and again, I think COVID is kind of unfortunately, quite a good example for this, where you do see, one, the speed of change that can happen there, but also the resilience that a lot of different communities will have, in that you suddenly have that community effect happen, where small businesses are normally part of where they're positioned locally. And they were the things that provided resilience in those communities during that time, during supply chain shortages from national brands, during national closures, though, it was the small businesses that stepped up and took on that mantle. So that collaboration, I think, is already there. It's just not being activated or used, or whatever the word is, to its full effect yet. And it's about giving confidence to small business owners that it is okay to collaborate onto net zero, and that no one has the answer. And I think that's what the message from Martin is the most important thing, I think, is that there is no single business here that, well, there are a couple that I can think of that are net zero, but there are very few of them that are, that they are definitely the exception to the rule, where they have spent the past few years hell-bent and focused on that as an outcome. and it's about giving permission to businesses not to be net zero, and that you can be on a net zero journey without being net zero. And that's the real challenge that I'm coming across at the minute, is that people are like, well, I can't say anything, so it's not good enough. It's like, well, like, done is better than perfect. Saying something is better than staying silent, and collaborating is always better than just suffering alone, because they're going to be having the same problems.
Yeah, and you speak to a really powerful point, because in organising the Falkirk event on the 9th of November, which is our flagship event for the Scottish Net Zero community, somebody got in touch who said, I'm a small accounting firm, and they said, we've just been thinking about net zero, and would we be a good panelist? And I said to them, yes, you'd actually be a perfect panelist, because you're showcasing that this is the journey. If all you see is people with the eco credentials that have been doing this for 30 years, you don't see yourself and you go, oh, that's not for me. Precisely. So being able to come and say, these are the small steps that we're taking, this is the journey that we're on. I suppose there's a proverb or an expression that says the only person that's climbing the mountain wrong is the person running around the mountain telling everybody else that they're going the wrong way. We all have different pathways up the mountain. And bringing it back, what we've talked about here so far, Adam, is we've said, if you start looking at your supply chain, that is one of the easiest ways of how you can start saving money on your net zero journey. It's just important to get started and recognize that the key to business resilience is a little bit of short-term disturbance for long-term resilience, and COVID has kind of highlighted, well, we need a short-term disruptions going to happen as climate risks increase. So how do we actually build in the resilience there? And then I just want to spend a little time talking about, well, how can businesses really profit from net zero? We've talked about it throughout the conversation, but I'd like to just really highlight this for everybody who's watching.
Yeah, I think there's a few kind of key points really on that, on the profit thing. So I think one is to start thinking in kind of a couple of years' time. This isn't going to be a thing that you can profit from instantly. There is, as you say, short-term disruption, and it's going to be a bit of pain in the arse for you to do a lot of these things. But I think that is true with any kind of change in marketing or market, so that you profit from it. So just as a whistle-stop tour and some thoughts on this, which we can dive into later. One, this is going to be the biggest industrial shift that we've seen in decades, if not centuries. And two, it's planned. That is the unique thing about what we're heading into here, is that this is something that every nation on earth is basically signing up to. Yes, at different points, but it's a direction of travel that everyone is heading in. And therefore, there is a plan to it, and we know what needs to happen. And therefore, you can position yourself as a business over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is, to be in the right sector at the right time to deliver a service that is needed, because we can see the problems that are coming, and there's government roadmaps for that. And that's only going to improve in terms of that foresight and planning. This is not something that can really be ignored. And I think secondly to that is what I mentioned earlier, and that a lot of net zero activities are around efficiency. It's about efficiency gains, and efficiency gains in a business context normally means saving money, and normally means more profit for you. So I think it's a mindset shift of going, actually, this isn't about someone nagging me to stop sending paper because paper's bad for the environment. It's more about thinking, well, actually, they've got a point. Do I need to send these letters anyway? Because when I send them, people just open it and then throw it straight in the bin. So it's really challenging yourself a little bit to think outside the box and just nudge you in a direction of, how do I save money as a business in a way that challenges assumptions, rather than just going, this is a cost-based thing. And that does get more complicated with heat pumps and insulation and all that stuff, where it's more bigger, chunky changes that the government have failed to provide clear, well, Westminster at least have failed to provide kind of clear roadmaps and policies on.
Yeah, I like what you said. Do you want to continue? Sorry.
No, I can't remember the rest of them. So I think that we'll pause for now, and then I'll wait for them to come back to me.
Excellent. Well, you said 2 points there, which is really huge, and it kind of builds in some of the other conversations that I've been having recently as well. You're talking about, this is the biggest industry shift that's happening, and it is planned. And one of the things that Martin Valenti had said about the reason to be optimistic about even this COP26, the fact that we've taken 26 COPs to get to here. He says, for the first time at COP, there's actually trillions of dollars of investment going on. Yeah. And then just sitting on my table there is actually a book where I have a friend from the States who's over she's a journalist doing stuff at COP, and she was talking about how she ended up in a conversation with one of the biggest venture capitalists from Silicon Valley. Now, I can't remember his name, but what she was saying, it's like any serious entrepreneur in the US, at least, this is like the dream team of backing. And his whole book is about how this is the biggest economic opportunity that humanity has ever faced. And being able to, I liked what you said there, to have that foresight, to be thinking long term means how can I disrupt what I'm doing and start thinking ahead so that when the opportunity comes, and it's going to come because all this legislation is coming into place, it's going to come and I'm able to take advantage of it. So not only am I maintaining my supply chain and building up the resilience there, I'm able to take better opportunities.
And I think the key here is that when we're talking about long term, for small businesses, long term is like 2 years. For a lot of the time, we're not talking about you having to think 10 years in the future when maybe you actually want to, retire or sell the business or whatever it might be. And that's the scale that large companies are having to think on. Whereas for small companies, it's like, well, if you want to just, for most companies that I've worked with and or for, it's one of those things where if you want to launch a new product range, you can do that in a couple of months. If you're really focused on it and you can set up a new business and you can do all those things, you can be very agile with it in a way that larger companies can't. So I think it's really that it's kind of, and I'm kind of conscious of this as well myself, heading into COP, being quite anxious about it and going, actually, the anxiety here over what if I'm not in the right place at the right time and kind of getting all the opportunity there. But I think it is that journey thing of this isn't going to go away after COP26. So if I don't meet the perfect people over the next 2 weeks, that's not the end of the road. That's kind of just, well, okay, let's continue this. This isn't going away. I just need to kind of refine what I'm doing. So next time I'm in a better position to meet those people. So yeah, I think it is that small businesses need to be given the reassurance and the excitement, the inspiration, the confidence to really understand that this is happening, this is coming, and this is going to be a good thing for them. Because if you move in the right ways, you're going to grow quite rapidly because of it. And there is money to be made once we are decoupling carbon emissions from economic growth, which I think that's a whole topic on itself. But things like renewable energy and electric car batteries, and this is one of the points in terms of the profit, is there's going to be entirely new sectors here that are opening up that just don't exist currently. So let's take electric car batteries as a very quick example of one of these technologies which is going to disrupt and change the model quite a lot. In the minute, you buy a petrol car, you drive at 150,000 miles, it effectively goes in the bin. It goes to a recycle yard, it gets kind of pulled apart, but the engine ultimately is not used for anything else. It's then used for spares and repairs, if that. With electric vehicles, it's entirely different. So the initial cost of building them probably is quite an intensive process. But once you've got that battery, that's an incredibly valuable resource that everyone wants a slice of in its entire lifetime. So that battery might do 150, 200,000 miles in an electric vehicle. And then it will become at a point where it's not ideal for that use anymore because it's, at 80% capacity or whatever it is. So then it goes from that. It doesn't go in the bin. It then goes into a second life element. So then it will go into either like a home battery storage unit, or it will go into a big array in a shipping container to be used for festivals. It's going to be used in, kind of retail units, or even it's going to be used at a wind farm or somewhere like that to provide grid energy level storage. And then that's going to have an entire layer of software on top of it that needs developing and managing and interacting with to manage the grid load demand for it. So that's immediately two examples there. Or the alternative, and we're seeing some of this, I think particularly down in England, there's quite a few small kind of boutique car companies that are taking these secondhand Nissan Leaf batteries and that from car crashes or from various bits, and then retrofitting them into old kind of classic cars, or not even classic cars that are then being restored from a point of you've got a chassis, but you don't have the engine anymore. It's like, well, then you can restore the chassis and put in an electric motor, and then you've got an entirely new car, and that's going to save the carbon emissions because you're not having to build a new thing. And that wouldn't have been possible with petrol cars. So immediately there's 3 or 4 different business areas that are coming through from one single technology. And we're really at the start of that in terms of what's coming. So in terms of that idea of this is an industrial revolution, this is an economic transition that's going to change things and it's planned, this is where you need to be looking, is kind of that 3-4 years ahead and going, well, actually, in the past 12 months, we've gone from electric cars being 1% of car sales or whatever it was, up to 15% of car sales. So immediately the secondhand car market for batteries in about 10 years time is probably going to be massive. And that's before you get to coaches and buses and all that stuff. So it's trying to look ahead and go, well, actually in my sector, what do I know about my sector, and where can I see it decarbonising? What are the knock-on effects of that going to be? And where can I position myself to deliver services there, which are then going to be a growth area where I can currently, it just doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great point for transitioning into small group discussions. I want to bring in what Jimmy has posted there. The element of taking responsibility enables the mantra of 10 two-letter words. If it is to be, it's up to me. Opportunities for starters can be seen at 10, the number -2.co.uk. And I think it's almost, you've set the scene really nicely as we shift into the breakout rooms, Adam, for, well, what are the opportunities that you're seeing within your sector for decarbonisation or expanding, evolving your business, and being able to just have a conversation and share with some of the other people who are on the sessions live to just explore that, so you can start that conversation, start thinking about where would you go, where would you start, where do you want to be in the next 2 years? So what we'll do is we will just open the breakout rooms now and let you go in. We'll give you about 10-15 minutes for the conversation so that you can have a time to network build, meet somebody that you've not met before, and we'll see you back here in about 10-15 minutes. And all you need to do is just click on the button that should be up on your screen just now, that will allow you to go and join the breakout rooms.
Everyone's disappearing slowly.
Yes. So we've got people going in rooms and some people maybe choosing to stay. Excellent.
As long as there's people and they're not putting themselves in the breakout rooms, I think that's the most important thing.
So Nina and Juliet, what is coming up for you? Come and join the conversation. What's coming up for you as you listen to today's conversation?
I think you had a question that you wanted to ask. Yeah,
yeah, I actually wanted to know how like you as a company, are you net zero? Like, are you on your way to net zero? Like, how far did you go, and how did that work out for you? Like, was it hard, easy, cost effective, I guess?
It's a good question. I think I don't know is the answer. I've not had a full kind of assessment done to say what my emissions are, but I imagine we're either carbon net zero or carbon positive. We do a fair bit of carbon offsetting activity, and also we're a digital business. We don't have a huge footprint. We're not dealing with thousands of. We don't send anything out. We don't move things around. It's all digital. So we're kind of quite a bad example because, well, not bad, but if you're a digital marketing company, for example, it is quite easy to be net zero. So at home, renewable energy.
Yeah.
I don't have a car. Get trains everywhere. Vegetarian and various other bits. So the blending of the personal footprint into that business footprint is quite tight. So there are areas I can reduce it down more. Could go vegan, but I think there's a point where you have to have that personal value cut off. So I think there's in terms of that journey, what I'm more interested in is impact. So I think it's less about, and this is also a bit of a get out clause, I think, a get out of jail free card, which is it should be criticized, but it's less about what I'm doing and it's about what is the impact that I'm having. So it doesn't matter that my impact is 10 tons of CO2 a year if all the companies I'm working with over the course of a year reduce by 2 tons each, and then I'll work with 1,000 companies, then that's 2,000 tons of CO2 saved. And that's what I want to try and get really distilled into all the small businesses I work with. And that's why the supply chain thing is so important, because there comes a point with a small business where the return on investment, either in time or money for you, reducing your impact down becomes kind of not really worthwhile. But then if you can have an impact on others around you, that becomes far more beneficial in terms of that return on investment, and it's going to have much more in your scope 3. So
yeah,
sure.
Definitely. We both worked for quite a big plastic packaging manufacturer here in Netherlands, yeah. And they're actually part of a bigger corporation that's American, and they're called Berry. And we noticed that the sustainability strategy of Berry is quite vague. It's just like very
vague,
go green,
Yeah.
like put in place recycling bins and things like that, which is like, yeah, it is important.
Yeah.
But then like with regards to the company that we work for, which is called Pet Power, they did have a more extensive sustainability measure that was in place. And we also worked with other groups. For example, we had a group called Bantam, who, they work with ocean-bound plastics. So basically they pick up plastics that are on their way to the ocean. And we actually had quite a few discussions with them in regards to LCAs and being able to calculate the carbon footprint. And it's just like in this specific industry, and I'm sure it's the same in different industries as well, it's really hard to be able to actually calculate the impact that you have on the planet. And despite that, they're still implementing measures that are incredible. Like, I mean, specifically the ocean-bound plastics manufacturer Bantam. I mean, they're implementing changes. As soon as there's scraps in the factory or anything, they just like rebring them back into the whole process.
But I guess
can I just ask before you continue on? Sorry, what was LCAs? Because I know that people listening to the recording might turn around and say, "Okay, that's an acronym. What does it mean?"
It means life cycle assessments.
Okay, thank you.
It's calculated from the start to the end of a product, like how many emissions it generates.
So just as an example on that, so rather than if you're a company selling mugs, for example, your company footprint might be 10 tons a year, but that mug might have a footprint of 5 kilos a year. And it's about working out what that individual product level thing is, so that then you can put all the pieces together on top of that and then get a more accurate kind of company one. And this is a real interesting thing, because I think it's one of those things that will only get better with time. And in 5 years time, there'll be technology platforms and all that have all this information out there. But
but as of now, it's really hard to be able to calculate. You're just using just like random averages of numbers, like for CO2 of transportation of a kilogram per truck, and you're like,
it's
this
like
isn't even accurate.
No, because like obviously, like maybe there's traffic, then it's way more. But that's also been one of the big problems with like the like sending the pellets, so the plastic parts over, because of course, like if you send them from Indonesia, that like takes way more CO2 in emissions than if you actually like just get it from Rotterdam, which is 20 minutes from here. But then you have, like as you said, like also impact, like the ocean-bound plastic that is picked up is not going into the sea, so that is a positive impact also on the environment ecosystem.
But the point of us like talking about this is that I really appreciate the fact that you're talking specifically about small businesses, because big companies, big corporations, like the group that like we were part of, like have like whole sustainability departments that are dedicated at like studying that, whereas like small businesses are often left out of the conversation and are often just abandoned and just left to take care of their own. So
that's exactly why I started Small 99, was because I was reading all this advice on like how to reduce your footprint, blah, blah, blah. And it was like, it would always end the article that I was reading with, so get your sustainability like manager, or get someone, assign a member of your team to be a sustainability person. It's like, no, like businesses, like most small businesses aren't going to get like the person who's cutting someone's hair to also look after their sustainability stuff. Like, it's just not, there's an element where you need to have the entire team on board and all thinking about this and going, well, actually, oh yeah, we are buying all these scissors every week. Is there a better way of doing this, or whatever it might be, so that they can kind of change their own behaviors to get the kind of the system change going. But just any article that ends with consultant or framework or pledge or commitment, I'm like immediately useless, delete it.
Definitely.
And another question, like how easy have your clients been finding the transition? Like, have they given any feedback on that?
It's an interesting one at the minute, because a lot of the people I'm working with are quite passionate about net zero, so they love doing it, and they're very. I can't really give an accurate answer to that at the minute, and this is a challenge for next year, really, is for me to find more businesses that aren't motivated almost. So basically, in my head, I've got Dave the builder who sits in the pub at 4 p.m. and is like watching footy. Like, how do we get him to net zero? Because he's driving a Range Rover or a diesel like van all the time. He goes on holiday to Spain 3 times a year. He earns decent money, doesn't really care about the environment, isn't going to go vegan or vegetarian or anything like that. So it's like, okay, so how do we get the framework and the messaging around net zero to a point where they kind of engage with it and it kind of adopts that mass market? And because I think at the minute, I'm very conscious that I'm in a little bit of a bubble where all the people that I'm working with, or most of the people I'm working with, they're interested in this, it's on their kind of radar, and it's like, okay, I can see the benefit of this. I don't really know what to do with it, but I'm willing to spend a bit of time with Adam just to see what happens. And if you lose a bit of money, it's fine. It's a bit of experience. It's a bit of fun. They kind of got that engagement with it. So yeah, it's difficult. But
yeah, the notion of bubble is something that we could definitely relate to, because I mean, okay, yeah, we worked in the plastic packaging industry. That's something completely different, but we both studied environmental things for our master's degrees. So we were really stuck in that bubble. Like everyone's either vegetarian, vegan, or cutting out meat, and everyone's like constantly talking about different ways that you can actually change the things that you do on a daily basis in order to be more friendly to the environment. And I feel like sometimes, like I'll just have a conversation with a family member who doesn't even know what COP stands for, and is like, "What do you mean? Just like a police officer?" I'm like, "No." Parties, and it's just like sometimes you just forget. And it's really important to be able to make all this information accessible in a way that isn't exclusive of any members of society. So like, yeah, I really appreciate what you're doing at Small 99.
Small 99. I think the challenge really is, and this is where I kind of put a post on LinkedIn a few months ago that summarized this, which is like net zero is not a technology problem, it's not a finance problem, it's a marketing problem where it's just people aren't being sold it in the right way. And it was annoying me that the people in my bubble were talking about this in terms of saving the planet or in terms of saving the trees or ecosystems. Like no one really cares about the planet or the trees or ecosystems or the polar bears. People are too busy in their own lives just trying to get to work and not be stressed. So how do we kind of pull that information out and insert it and kind of use the marketing? Because my background's in marketing, I guess that's probably why. But how do you it's the whole idea of give people what they need, sell them what they want. So you sell people what they want, which probably isn't anything to do with the environment. It will be about reducing costs, or it'll be about winning more business, or it'll be about building more resilience, but even that's a bit of a vague term. And then what they actually need is net zero. So then you kind of deliver that, but that's the second message that you come at them with. And not there yet. But.
We're just going to wrap up there because I'm conscious that we're just about to hit the 1 minute time to come back. But I think it's a really important point that you just mentioned there, Adam, because it's quite interesting. My friend, I think I've mentioned her twice already. So Joan Michelson, Electric Ladies, she's come back from COP, and one of her first comments was, it's all written in United Nations language. She says, so you've got 30,000 people wandering around going, what is it? Where am I supposed to go? She said they haven't written this for the general public. They've written it for the internal organization. And I thought that was a really, really powerful insight and a learning message almost to back up exactly what you're saying there. And we have to speak in the language that the people understand.
Exactly. And I think it is just getting that us on the bubble and on the fringe of that COP26, how do we then look inward, take the COP26 language and then throw it out that is in a more just digestible, like practical way. So
more accessible.
Yeah. Accessible, that's the right word. Yeah, accessible.
That's cool. So we've got a few minutes as people, a few seconds. They're given 30 seconds. This is always the bit. Are they going to come back? Are they having too many good conversations?
It's always the waiting for, you don't want to start a conversation new because it's going to end mid sentence. So just that kind of polite silence while everyone waits.
Yeah.
Now's the time to stretch, stand up.
Get a new cup of tea.
I really appreciate your cats in the background. By the way.
Could you hear them howling? My goodness, they were like so vocal. I haven't let them out today after Kira got stuck up the tree and I had to climb up a 10-foot tree to bring her back in. So they're desperate. Welcome back. Welcome back, Amanda, Jimmy, Brian, Ken Hards. I'm not quite sure what your first name is there. We're now moving into a bit more of a relaxed Q&A session. We've got about 15 minutes left, so we'd really like to hear from you guys. What were the conversations you were having? What's coming up for you? What questions do you have maybe for Adam? And if you just want to unmute yourself, raise your hand, and whoever wants to go first. Jimmy, and then we'll come to you, Brian, and then we'll come to
Sarah.
Just let me, what's your name, sorry?
It's Sarah.
Sarah, and then we'll come to Sarah. Excellent. Jimmy.
Well, very, very quickly, I've taken a couple of notes when Brian was, when Adam was talking. My apologies, because Brian and I were in the same room, and it's the reason I said Brian. But that, one of the things that you said prompted me, you know, when you were talking about providing a service to help others on that same direction, the same journey. And, you know, you didn't say how early you should catch them. So what I'm obviously trying to do is catch them as early as possible. I used to run a young engineers club. And of course, being involved in Rotary, we've got Interact, which is 12 to 17. And then you've got Rotaract 18 to 30. And that whole element. But the one thing that intrigued me the most was you mentioned near the end that, you know, when you write off an electric car, then that's enabling somebody, you know, to take the batteries and the engine or the motor if it's still running, and then upgrade an old car. Can you give us an example? Do you know of somebody that's actually done that? Because I find that fascinating.
Yes, there's a few companies at different levels of kind of spend, depending on what you want to do. The most famous, I can't remember the company's name, it's called, I think it's like Lunaz or something like that, that David Beckham actually put a bunch of cash into, where they'll take old Range Rovers, Rolls Royces, Jags, and fully restore them into new vehicles that cost £300,000 and upwards type stuff. So there's that level. There's also a company, I think they're based in the West Midlands somewhere, that do it with Mazda MX-5s and various kind of cars like that, where and I don't know that much about cars, but I just saw a video on it where, because of the battery and the motor weights, it actually improves the balance of handling, because it isn't a perfect 50-50 balance, because you can control where you put the weight distribution because of the batteries, and you can just build them out bigger and smaller and stuff like that. And a lot of these cars don't need big batteries because they're used as leisure vehicles. They're driving at weekends. So you can get away quite easily with 150, 200 miles range, because people only drive them to the shops or to the pub down in the nearest village. So I definitely have a look at, there's a YouTube channel called Fully Charged, which we've covered this quite a lot. And there's also a guy called Johnny Smith who would have a look at, because both of those are kind of connected, but they've done a lot of videos on this, and it is an entire industry of kind of retrofit, retro mod electric vehicles, where they're taking, and there's people have done it with like Ferraris and stuff like that, but a lot of the time it's where they can't get parts for the cars, or they can't, you know, the bodies that would otherwise be uneconomical to restore. And that electric battery just makes it cheaper, because then the running costs are nil. And you know, the parts are fairly cheap because it's a degraded battery, and you can get secondhand motors and stuff like that. So it's gonna, I think in 5-10 years, it will be a massive industry that people aren't really aware of and don't see coming, because it just makes it a bit more fun. And it's that nostalgia thing, is you can take a car from the 50s, you can take a car from the 20s, you can take a car from the 80s, and just, you know, and just chuck a battery and a few motors in it, and you're away. Obviously, it's more complicated than that, but that's for the engineers to solve. But
thank you.
Cool. Cheers, Jimmy.
Brian.
Thanks, thank you. Just listening to the part about, we're at the very beginning of our journey. We're just literally, because of where we're at the moment, all the press, we're beginning to sit and say, well, let's have a look at what happens. We are a training company. We're an international training company. 60% of what we do is outside the UK. Pre-COVID, we used to send out materials that would be shared with people in groups. Physically, you can't do that now with COVID. We're having to send out lots of extra paper, lots of stuff, and our people are all saying it's a terrible waste of paper at the moment. We're saying, but no, this is the balance that we're all having to make today, is what are the pressures on us and how do we juggle them? And this is what I'm really thinking of at the moment, is we've got this whole net zero target. We've also got to look at the ISO standards, international standard organizations, of 9001 quality, 14001 for environment. And we're looking also at things like 27001 data security, because that's the ones that our clients are really pushing at us. And Adam, that was exactly the point I was hoping you would make, that clients will push, especially your big clients, which is what we deal with. But I don't see the real pressure coming yet on the environmental side. I see it on quality. If you don't have your ISO 9001, you're struck out straight away. If you don't have cybersecurity, you're being struck out, because that's dealing with data privacy and personal data. And so far, I'm not seeing any of this rush from big companies to strike out companies that have not got environmental policies and procedures. I think it's going to come, and I agree that's the kind of way that we're starting to look at. And it's just trying to say, I think your comments about look at your supply chain were very helpful, because it is that part of where do you go to look right at the very beginning. So we've started that. So thank you. You've kind of reaffirmed that my approach has been correct. But I don't know how we'll be able to push this all the way down our supply chain. We are a very small purchaser of whatever these other companies do.
I think that's the challenge, but I think the point I'm trying to do, and certainly this is what I'm hoping from me doing all these events and saying the same thing over and over and over again, is that if you're asking your supplier where their environmental policy is, that's probably not going to get them to move. But when 15 other customers also asking for the same thing, they're like, oh, bloody hell, we'll put one together, we'll get it sorted. And hopefully then they come to me and buy my services to do it. But it's that idea of, we're still at a stage now where doing anything is better than nothing. And I think that goes for small companies, and I think that also goes for larger companies. And that's why they're not asking yet for necessarily coming to you and asking for stuff, because they're probably grappling with that internally as well, and on what their net zero strategy, actions, etc. are. So yeah, I think it's one of those things that I think everyone will think it's a long way away until it isn't. And then suddenly everyone will be demanding it and talking about it. And that might be 6 months away. It might be 18 months away. I don't think it's more than 2 years away. I think it is really, it's in that window of just people will start asking for it, especially once we've got clearer net zero requirements and like definitions for small businesses. And also, as you say, like 14,001 and other frameworks like that start becoming a bit more accessible for small businesses that currently are out of reach.
Thanks, Brian. Sarah.
Hi there, sorry. So I work for South Scotland Enterprise, which is a sort of economic and community development agency. And we are sort of working to engage with businesses with a net zero agenda, along with other businesses, all sorts of businesses. But I guess my question, and it's probably aimed at Adam, is what can we as a government agency do to be helping and supporting businesses to at the start of the journey, in the middle of the journey, whichever part they're at, what can we be doing to engage and help them?
So I think at the minute, the main thing that needs to happen is just the conversation, get the conversation going, which I think we're still at a point where that's really lacking. And that sounds like maybe a little bit of a kind of a poor answer, but just in terms of the thinking back to, like, this is a climate crisis, right? So we need to start treating it as such. And I think when you look back over the past 2 years and look at COVID, the response from agencies and kind of bodies such as yourself was that became the dominant thing that consumed your bandwidth of communication over that period quite correctly. We're not really seeing that with net zero. We're still seeing net zero as a thing that's a nice thing to have that you top onto the end, and it's a little tick box. So it's about, okay, so how do we take that? And this isn't necessarily from a management point of view or from an organizational point of view. This is from just like the kind of grassroots of everyone in the organization having to understand that net zero is an opportunity for building business resilience and growth over the next 5 years. And therefore, it's not something that's another tick box or a nice to have. It is something that will fundamentally grow businesses over the next decade and help them recover from COVID rather than being an objection or a chore. So I think changing the way you communicate about it and simplifying communication and communicating more would probably be my kind of main three. I think, and I don't know enough about this at the minute, but it depends on what funds and stuff you've got available. And that seems to currently be very fragmented. So at the business chamber event yesterday, there was a lot of discussion around this and that there is funding out there. It's just potluck and depending on your postcode, because one of the people that I'm working with, they're based in the southeast of England. So they got like a £10,000 grant for installing a air source heat pump in their house in their kind of like home office area. But someone based in, North London, 50 miles away, wouldn't be able to access that money. So we're still in that position where a lot of the finance around this is incredibly fragmented, and that I think is partly a policy problem. So if you can fix that, please do. But if not, I think it's also a communication problem of just not really knowing where to look for it. And like, I don't really know what's available. And my answer is always just contact your local chamber, because it does seem to vary so much. So I think we're still in that communication phase, and that needs to be tightened up a bit more, both in terms of identifying this as an opportunity, not a chore. And this isn't an additional activity, it's a core activity, as well as then just communicating the finance and the costs and the support that's available in a much simpler way, because at the minute it seems a little bit all over the place. I don't think that's anyone's fault. I think it is just where we're at.
Okay, thank you very much, Adam.
Cheers. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? I just want to check, Amanda, if you'd like to say anything. You're under no obligation to, but the floor is yours if you want it. You're okay? Fine.
No, it's just to say, no, Adam, I've been to some of your other events and they're always so like informative and really like engaging. Like basically what you say, I'll go back and reiterate to my boss. Like Sarah, I work for Business Gateway. So similar to a Chamber of Commerce, we work in partnership with our local chamber, and everything you say, I completely agree with. There is, like right now, we're even just struggling to get, I think, bums on virtual seats. Like businesses are aware of it, they know it's coming, but I don't think it's like high on the agenda for a lot of the SMEs in my sort of local area. And I think we've got a hard sell. I think it will come, and it will come like a flood. But I think it's just trying to have like conversations with the lifestyle businesses that you've discussed, and getting them on board with it. And collaboration, such a big thing. Collaboration, that's something that I'm really going to take forward and work with.
Just to jump on something you said there, I think in terms of the not getting bums on seats and it being a bit of a challenge, I think a lot of that, and this isn't aimed at you because I'm not sure what you've been doing necessarily, but I do think it is back down to that framing of it, where I'm still seeing a lot of the events around this be so, and this might be quite a good example of, how much does net zero cost? And it's not how much money could you make from net zero, or what are the opportunities from net zero, or how net zero is going to make you happier, healthier, and all that stuff. So I think it's really about how we start framing it and just getting I hate using this word, but it's quite a good one, is discourse around net zero to stop being about sacrifice and start being about gain, and going, let's not talk about how it's going to cost you money. You're going to need to fly less, drive less, etc. It's going to be how do you earn more money, build more resilience, be healthier, be happier, etc. And protect local communities. And this goes in then into like air pollution and all that stuff. It is always going to be beneficial there as well. So I think it is just that whole, when you're making events and when you're doing those webinars, is just think about the title of it and go, well, actually, is this attracting people, or is this potentially going to make people feel a bit more negative around it? So I've just seen a question come in. I'm not sure if we want to respond to that.
Yeah, we've got 1 minute. So here's a question, Amanda, just before we finish up, since it's come in. Jimmy's asking you, do you think if there were compliance officers in place that the adoption rate would increase?
I'd like to think so, potentially, but a lot of stuff's enshrined in law now, isn't it? Like, our targets in Scotland, that's written into law. We're going to be carbon net zero by 2045, but I think it's business planning that's still years away. I'm not sure. I think finance is a key thing as well, because like or not, there is a lot of like capex spend for a lot of smaller businesses that they maybe just don't have, and if we could maybe plug that gap potentially, that could be quite beneficial. It's just my
I think just to jump on that very quickly, sorry. But again, from the event yesterday, there was a lot of talk around that capex spend for small businesses, and a lot of the feeling was that all of the finance that's available at the minute, at both kind of domestic and national level, it tends to be bigger, and it tends to be too big. So it is that 25, 50 grand and above. There's not that much finance out there that exists for less than 25 grand. So like heat pumps, solar panels that are normally like 5 to 10 grand. And that small businesses probably are willing to chip in a decent chunk of cash towards that. There's just not really much there. But if you want to go away and develop a fusion reactor, there's loads of money for it, and CCS stuff. And it is that there's just a bit of which I think is correct, because it's all smart funding and it's all from the government for these kind of slightly sexy energy projects. But in terms of the slightly boring energy projects, there's not much there. And I can't remember the guy's name. It was Jimmy. He's a Conservative MP for one of a North East constituency, he might be in Yorkshire, was saying that he wants to adopt like the German model of this, where there's a lot of government-backed cheap loans for things like installing solar panels on warehouses, where you can get a basically free loan from the government to install it. So that's what I'd like to see, is more of those small under 10 grand government-backed loans that are cheap, because I think, well, I believe that once small business owners see the benefit of this, they will act on it and they will take the risk because they can do. It's at the minute people just don't fully have that faith and trust. But when I worked in small companies, you know, if a business owner really wanted to spend 10 grand on something, they would just do it. It's just that, you know, they don't have that faith at the minute.
Brilliant. Thank you for those last words, Adam, and thank you for the conversation there. I get a sense that there could be a lot more conversations like this, and it's something that we really want to look at how the Scottish Net Zero community can continue to facilitate these conversations beyond COP26. So thank you, everybody, for taking your time to spend it with us today. Thank you, everybody who's watching the recording, and we hope to see you on one of the other events.
Thank you, everyone. Love to see you all.